The desert sun had not yet cleared the eastern ridges when Colonel James McAllister pressed his weathered hand against the gunmetal skin of the Warthog. His fingers traced the faded numbers stenciled near the cockpit. Tail number 80-0247. The same aircraft he had flown 33 years ago over the burning oil fields of Kuwait. The same machine that had carried him through hellfire and brought him home when younger men in faster jets had not returned. The metal was cool now in the pre-dawn stillness. Soon the sun would turn it into a furnace. But in this quiet hour before the base woke to another day of endless war, McAllister allowed himself to remember when his hands had been steadier and his eyes had seen farther, and the weight of all those years had not yet settled into his bones. He was 68 years old, retired from active duty for a decade. Now he worked as a civilian contractor, maintaining the aircraft he had once taken into combat. Some men his age played golf or fished or told the same stories to grandchildren who pretended to listen. McAllister kept the warthogs flying. It was the only thing that still made sense to him. The sound of boots on concrete pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see a figure approaching through the half-light, small frame, purposeful stride. Captain Sarah Brennan carried 2 cups of coffee in her hands and a worn leather journal tucked under her arm. She moved like someone who had learned early that the world would not make space for her unless she claimed it first. "Good morning, Gunner," she said. McAllister accepted the coffee. The steam rose between them like a peace offering. He had taught Sarah to fly 10 years ago when she was fresh out of the academy and still believed that competence would be enough. He had watched her graduate at the top of her class, had written the letter of recommendation that got her assigned to the A-10 program, had seen her name appear on assignment rosters with the kind of call sign that made old pilots nod in recognition. Warden 7-2, a call sign earned through skill, not given as a joke. "She ready?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the aircraft. "Always is, Captain. Question is, are you?" Sarah smiled. It was a small thing, the kind of expression that came and went so quickly you might miss it if you were not paying attention. McAllister had learned to read those fleeting moments. In 10 years, he had watched this young woman navigate a world that did not want her, had seen her shrug off insults that would have broken lesser pilots, had witnessed her quiet determination in the face of dismissal and mockery, and the casual cruelty of men who measured worth in inches and pounds, and whether you look like what they expected a warrior to look like. "Always ready." Always a Yahweh anyway. Then she sat down on the concrete, her back against the landing gear, and opened the journal. McAllister knew what that journal was. He had seen it before. Had held it once, years ago, before returning it to the widow of the man who had written those pages. Master Sergeant Thomas Brennan, United States Marine Corps. Killed in action, Fallujah, Iraq, March 16, 2003. Sarah had been 11 years old when the Marines came to her door with a folded flag and empty words about honor and sacrifice. Tom Brennan had been McAllister's friend. More than that, Tom had been the kind of Marine who made everyone around him better just by being there. Steady, reliable. The man you wanted on your six when everything went sideways. And McAllister had gotten him killed. Not directly. Not with his own hands, but with a bad order. With a decision made too quickly. With the kind of mistake that haunts a commander for the rest of his days. Sarah did not know that part. She knew her father had died in combat, knew he had been awarded the Navy Cross posthumously, knew the official story about heroism under fire. But she did not know that Tom Brennan had tried to warn his commanding officer that the patrol route was compromised. Did not know that McAllister had dismissed that warning because sergeants were not supposed to question officers, and because the mission timeline was tight, and because following protocol seemed more important than listening to instinct. Tom Brennan had disobeyed orders that day, had taken 3 Marines and pushed ahead to scout the route himself, had walked into the ambush he predicted, had disrupted it with grenades and rifle fire, and the kind of desperate courage that saves lives at the cost of your own. 40 Marines made it home because Tom Brennan trusted his gut over his commanding officer's judgment. McAllister had written the citation himself, had made sure Tom's family got the medal, had spent 21 years trying to balance the scales. And when Sarah Brennan showed up at flight school with her father's eyes and her father's quiet intensity, McAllister had known exactly what he had to do. He had to make sure Tom's daughter became what her father would have wanted her to be. Had to give her every tool, every lesson, every chance to survive in a world that was already deciding she did not belong. Your father used to sit just like that, McAllister said quietly. Before missions, reading, thinking, getting his head right. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were the same shade of brown as Tom's, the same capacity for both gentleness and hard focus. Did you know him well? McAllister took a long drink of coffee to buy himself time. The lie was easier than the truth, easier than explaining that he had killed her father through negligence and arrogance and the belief that rank mattered more than wisdom. We served together, he said. Long time ago? He was a good Marine. Sarah nodded and returned to the journal. McAllister watched her read, watched her lips move slightly as she worked through her father's words. Tom had been a careful writer, each entry precise, no wasted words. The journal was part technical, manual, part philosophy, the distilled wisdom of a man who understood that warfare was not about glory or heroics. It was about keeping the people next to you alive. After a long silence, Sarah closed the journal and stood. The sun was rising now. Golden light spilled across the flight line. In an hour, the base would be fully awake. The chow hall would fill with Marines loading calories before another patrol. The operations center would hum with radio chatter. The war would continue its grinding indifference to individual lives. Black Ridge Valley, Sarah said. Something about tomorrow's mission feels wrong. McAllister set down his coffee. He had learned over decades to trust that feeling. The instinct that came not from training manuals, but from experience. From all the times you had seen something before and lived to remember it. Show me, he said. They walked to the ready room. Empty at this hour. Maps covered the walls. Terrain features marked in grease pencil, flight paths and restricted zones, and all the careful planning that went into modern warfare. Sarah pulled down a large-scale map of the operational area and spread it across the table. Her finger traced the contour lines of Black Ridge Valley. Here, she said, the valley runs north to south, high ground on three sides. One approach, one exit. McAllister studied the map. He had seen terrain like this before. In Kuwait, in Bosnia, in all the places where geography created opportunities for those who understood how to use it. Choke point, he said. Sarah nodded. If I was planning an ambush, this is where I would do it. Put machine guns on the eastern ridge, RPGs in the western draws. Wait for the convoy to commit, then close the door. McAllister looked at her, really looked, saw not just the captain in front of him, but the 11-year-old girl who had stood at her father's grave. Saw the weight she carried, the need to prove herself, the fear that she would never measure up to a father she barely remembered. You have been studying this, he said. It was not a question. 3 months, Sarah admitted. Since we got the operational briefing, the intelligence says minimal enemy presence. But the terrain does not lie. This valley is a killing field waiting to happen. McAllister traced the same routes she had marked. His mind overlaid memories of other valleys, other ambushes. The mathematics of death were consistent across decades. Terrain did not change. Human nature did not change. And the arrogance of commanders who believed their plans were bulletproof never changed. Have you reported this up the chain? Sarah's expression told him everything. Of course she had reported it, and of course no one had listened, because she was a logistics officer, just officer assigned to communications duty, because she had never flown a combat mission, because she was not part of the club, because the men making decisions had already decided what she was and what she was not. Tomorrow's briefing, McAllister said. Make sure you speak up. They will not listen, Sarah said. They never listen. McAllister picked up his coffee cup. Cold now. He drank it anyway. Bitter and flat, like most truths. Your father said something to me once, McAllister told her. Before his last mission, he said that being right did not matter if you kept it to yourself. That warriors had a duty to speak even when no one wanted to hear it. Sarah looked down at the map, at all those contour lines that spelled out death for anyone who could read them. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Did my father die because someone did not listen? McAllister felt the question like a knife between his ribs. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for 21 years, had imagined 1,000 ways to answer. But standing here in the ready room with Tom Brennan's daughter, asking the question he had always feared, all the careful words evaporated. Yes, he said. Your father died because his commanding officer was too arrogant to listen to a sergeant who knew better. Sarah's head came up, her eyes locked on his. Who was his commanding officer? McAllister set down the empty cup. His hand was shaking slightly. Not from age, from the weight of carrying a secret that had turned into a lie, that had turned into the thing that defined everything he had done for the last 2 decades. Me, he said. I was his commanding officer, and I got your father killed. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside the ready room, the base was coming to life. Voices in the distance, the rumble of vehicles, the ordinary sounds of another day in an endless war. But inside that room, there was only the space between revelation and reaction, between the man who had carried guilt like a stone in his chest and the woman who had just learned that her father's death was not the random tragedy she had believed it to be. Sarah did not speak, did not move. McAllister forced himself to hold her gaze. If she was going to hate him, he would not hide from it. He had hidden from enough. Your father warned me the patrol route was compromised, McAllister continued. His voice was steady now. The words came easier once they started. He told me we were walking into an ambush. I dismissed his concerns, told him we were on a tight timeline, that the intelligence said the route was clear, that he was worrying too much. McAllister reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, creased and worn. He had carried it every day since it had been declassified 3 months ago, had read it so many times he could recite it from memory. This is the after-action report, he said, handing it to Sarah. The real one, not the sanitized version they gave your mother. Tom disobeyed my order, took 3 Marines forward to scout, walked into exactly the ambush he predicted, engaged the enemy alone to give the main patrol time to react, died buying time for 40 men to escape. Sarah unfolded the report. Her hands were steadier than his. She read in silence. McAllister watched her eyes move across the page, watched her absorb the truth, watched the moment when she reached the handwritten note at the bottom. His note, written in the immediate aftermath when the guilt was still fresh and raw. This Marine saved 40 lives by trusting his instinct over his commanding officer's orders. I failed him. I failed my Marines. I failed my duty. If there is any honor in this action, it belongs to Master Sergeant Brennan alone. The shame is mine. Sarah folded the report carefully, precisely, the way her father would have. Then she handed it back to McAllister. Why are you telling me this now? Because tomorrow 540 Marines are going to drive into that valley, McAllister said. And the same officers who did not listen to your father are not going to listen to you. And I will not make the same mistake twice. Sarah looked at the map again, at the valley that had consumed her attention for 3 months, at all those careful calculations and approach vectors and weapon employment data that no one had asked to see. What do you want me to do? McAllister met her eyes, Tom's eyes, the eyes of a warrior who had known when the moment came to choose between orders and conscience. I want you to be ready, he said, when the time comes, when everything goes wrong, when the people in charge freeze because they are too afraid of being wrong. I want you to be ready to do what your father did, to trust your training over their hesitation. And if they court-martial me, McAllister smiled. It was a sad thing, weighted with all those years of regret. Then I will testify at your trial and tell them it was my fault, he said. Again. The morning briefing gathered every officer and senior NCO on the base. The operations center conference room was too small for the crowd. Men stood along the walls, clustered near the door. The air smelled of coffee and the particular tension that came before large-scale missions. Colonel William Hartwell stood at the front of the room, 57 years old, ramrod straight posture, silver eagles on his collar. The kind of officer who made checklists for his checklists. On his desk in his private office sat a photograph of his father. Captain James Hartwell, United States Air Force. Missing in action over Laos, 1972. Presumed dead. Body never recovered. William Hartwell had been 5 years old when the Air Force officers came to inform his mother that her husband was not coming home. He remembered the folded flag, the empty words, the way his mother had held that flag every night for a year afterward. He remembered growing up without a father. Remembered the questions from other kids at school. Remembered learning early that following the rules meant people came home and breaking the rules meant families got flags instead of fathers. That lesson had shaped every decision Hartwell made over 35 years of service. Follow the rules. Trust the process. Do not deviate. Because the moment you went off script, the moment you thought you knew better than the doctrine written in the blood of previous generations, that was when people died. Gentlemen, Hartwell began. His voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. The room fell silent. Tomorrow at 0600 we launch Operation Black Ridge. 540 Marines will conduct a sweep of the valley complex here. He pointed to the map projected on the screen. The valley looked clean from above. Satellite imagery showed empty terrain. Thermal scans revealed no significant heat signatures. Signals intelligence reported minimal radio traffic. Every piece of data said the valley was cold, that this would be a routine operation, that the Marines would roll in, clear suspected weapons caches, and roll out by sunset. Intelligence assessment shows minimal enemy presence, Hartwell continued. We expect scattered resistance at most. Small arms, maybe a few IEDs. Nothing a battalion cannot handle. Rules of engagement are standard. Danger close protocols remain in effect. No offensive air support inside 200 meters of friendly positions. Sarah sat in the back row, her notebook open, pen ready. She had been taking notes since the briefing began. Not because she needed to remember. She already knew this terrain better than the men planning the operation. But writing gave her hands something to do, gave her an excuse to look down instead of meeting the eyes of officers who had already decided she did not matter. Major Paul Hendricks stood beside Hartwell, 45 years old, Bosnia and Iraq veteran. His service record showed 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. It did not show the scars on his hands where shrapnel had torn through his gloves during a friendly fire incident in Ramadi. Did not show the nights he woke up seeing the faces of the 2 Marines who had died because he had called in a close air support mission with incorrect grid coordinates. Hendricks had spent 17 years afterward following every regulation to the letter, checking every number twice, triple-checking radio frequencies, because he knew what happened when you rushed, when you cut corners, when you trusted your gut instead of the procedures designed to keep people alive. The mission timeline is tight, Hendricks added. We have a 12-hour window, in and out before dark. Questions? Sarah's hand went up. The room shifted, not dramatically, just small movements. Officers glancing at each other, a few smirks, the kind of casual dismissal that had become so routine, Sarah barely noticed it anymore. But McAllister, standing in the civilian observer section, noticed. And Sergeant Major Frank Delaney, leaning against the wall near the door, noticed. And both men felt something tighten in their chests. Captain Brennan, Hartwell acknowledged. Make it quick. Sarah stood, all 5 feet 3 inches of her, small enough that some of the Marines in the back had to crane their necks to see her. She moved to the map. Her finger traced the valley outline. Sir, with respect, this terrain presents significant tactical challenges. The valley creates natural choke points here and here. High ground on 3 sides. Limited avenues of approach. If enemy forces are present in any significant numbers, our Marines will have no room to maneuver. Hartwell's expression did not change. Thank you, Captain. We have reviewed the terrain analysis. Sarah continued as if he had not spoken. The contour lines indicate intersecting fields of fire from the eastern and western ridges. A small force properly positioned could create a kill zone covering the entire valley floor. Machine guns here, RPG teams in these draws. Our vehicles will be channeled into a corridor with no cover and no escape routes. Captain Brennan, Major Hendricks said. His voice was patient. The kind of patience adults use with children who did not understand. We appreciate your input, but we have been planning operations in this theater since before you graduated from the academy. The intelligence is clear. The valley is cold. Sarah's grip tightened on her pen. Intelligence has been wrong before, sir. The room temperature seemed to drop. Officers exchanged looks. A few shook their heads. One captain in the 3rd row muttered something to his neighbor. The neighbor laughed quietly. Sergeant Major Delaney pushed off from the wall. He was 52 years old, 30 years in the Corps, had served in Desert Storm, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, had seen more combat than half the officers in this room combined. He had also served with Master Sergeant Tom Brennan in Fallujah, had been in the patrol that Tom had saved by disobeying orders and walking into an ambush alone. Delaney had not known until this morning that Captain Sarah Brennan was Tom's daughter, had not made the connection. Different last name back then. Tom's wife had remarried a few years after his death. Sarah had taken her stepfather's name. But when McAllister had mentioned it before the briefing, something had clicked into place. The way Sarah moved, the way she studied problems, the quiet intensity, all of it was Tom Brennan's legacy. Colonel, Delaney said. His voice carried the authority of 3 decades. Perhaps we should consider the captain's assessment. Hartwell turned. Thank you, Sergeant Major. I have made my decision. The words hung in the air like a judge's gavel. Final, absolute, not open for discussion. Hartwell had a son serving as a Marine lieutenant in another theater, had a daughter in college who wanted to join the Navy, had built his entire career on the principle that following established procedures kept people alive. He was not going to throw out a carefully planned operation because a junior officer with no combat experience had a bad feeling. Captain Brennan, Hartwell said. His tone was formal now. Official. Your primary duty is communications coordination. I expect you to focus on that role. Tactical planning is above your pay grade. Are we clear? Sarah's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. The room emptied quickly. Officers heading to their duties. Marines preparing for the next day's operation. Sarah remained seated as the crowd flowed past her. She did not look up, did not acknowledge the sideways glances or the whispered comments, just sat with her notebook open and her father's journal resting on her lap. McAllister found her there 10 minutes later. The conference room was empty now, except for the two of them. The map still glowed on the projection screen. Black Ridge Valley, innocent lines on a digital display. Contour intervals measured in meters. No hint of the death those lines predicted. You did what you could, McAllister said. It was not enough. It never is, not the first time. Sarah looked up at her, and what do you mean? McAllister sat down beside her. His knees protested. Too many years, too many jumps from too many aircraft. The kind of wear that came with the job. Your father warned his commanding officer about an ambush, McAllister said. Just like you warned Colonel Hartwell. His CO did not listen. Just like Hartwell did not listen to you. Your father went ahead anyway. Saved 40 Marines, died doing it. Sarah absorbed this. You think I should disobey orders tomorrow? McAllister chose his words carefully. I think you should be ready when the moment comes, when everything goes to hell, when 540 Marines are dying because the men in charge are too paralyzed by regulations to do what needs to be done. I think you should be ready to trust your training over their fear. And if I am wrong, then you will have made a mistake trying to save lives, McAllister said. I made a mistake trying to follow procedure. I know which one I would choose if I could go back. They sat in silence for a long moment. The bass hummed around them. Generators, air conditioning, the distant sound of aircraft engines, the ordinary machinery of war. Finally, Sarah spoke. Why did you really tell me about my father this morning? McAllister had known the question would come, had rehearsed the answer. But sitting here in this empty conference room with Tom Brennan's daughter, all the rehearsed words felt hollow. Because I owe him, McAllister said. Because I got him killed, and I have spent 21 years trying to make up for it. Because when I saw you at flight school, I knew I had been given a chance to do for you what I should have done for him. Train you, prepare you, make sure you had every tool you needed to survive. And because tomorrow when those Marines drive into that valley and everything goes wrong exactly like you predicted, you are going to have to decide whether to be your father's daughter or just another officer following orders. Sarah looked at him. Really looked. Saw not just the retired colonel who had taught her to fly, but the man who had carried guilt for more than 2 decades, who had watched her graduate at the top of her class knowing it was not enough. That competence would never be enough in a world that had already decided what she was allowed to be. Did my father know, she asked, that he was going to die? McAllister thought back to that morning in Fallujah, to the last conversation he had with Tom Brennan. Tom had been checking his gear, moving with that careful deliberation that comes before patrols. McAllister had briefed the mission. Tom had raised concerns. McAllister had dismissed them. And Tom had accepted the dismissal with a nod. No argument, no protest, just acceptance. But as Tom had turned to leave, he had stopped. Had looked back at McAllister with an expression that now, 21 years later, McAllister finally understood. Gunner, Tom had said, using McAllister's call sign instead of his rank. If something happens to me out there, will you watch over Sarah? Make sure she becomes what she is meant to be? McAllister had laughed it off. Nothing is going to happen, Tom. Routine patrol. Tom had smiled, a sad smile. The smile of a man who knew better but did not have the words to explain how he knew. Just promise me, Tom had said. Watch over her. And McAllister had promised, not understanding then that Tom was saying goodbye. That Tom had already decided that when the moment came and the ambush sprang and the choice was between following orders or saving lives, Tom Brennan had already known which path he would choose. McAllister looked at Sarah. At Tom's eyes looking back at him through time and loss and all the years between. Yes, McAllister said quietly. I think your father knew. The convoy rolled out at 0545. 540 Marines and 37 vehicles. Humvees and MRAPs and supply trucks. A ribbon of olive drab stretched across the desert floor. Dust plumes rose behind them. The sun was just clearing in the horizon. Golden light illuminated the column. Sarah stood on the command center observation deck and watched them go. She had not slept. Had spent the night in the ready room, studying maps and running calculations and trying to find a flaw in her analysis. Some variable she had missed. Some reason to believe she was wrong and the intelligence was right, and those 540 Marines would roll into Black Ridge Valley and roll back out again by sunset with nothing worse than sunburn and boredom. She had found no such flaw. The mathematics were clear. The geometry was unforgiving. If enemy forces were present in any meaningful numbers, if they had positioned themselves with any tactical intelligence, if they chose to spring their trap at the moment of maximum vulnerability, then Black Ridge Valley would become a graveyard. McAllister stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had done what they could, raised the warning, made the case, been dismissed. Now all they could do was watch and wait and hope they were wrong. Lance Corporal Danny Castellano rode in the 4th Humvee, 20 years old, 6 months in country. This was his 3rd major operation. The first 2 had been quiet. Long hours of heat and boredom punctuated by moments of adrenaline when shadows moved or radios crackled or the ever-present threat of IEDs made every pothole suspect. Danny did not know his grandfather had trained Captain Brennan, did not know McAllister was watching from the base, did not know anything except that he was young and strong and certain that he and his brothers in arms could handle whatever the desert threw at them. The Marine beside Danny was scrolling through pictures on his phone, his girlfriend back home. Danny had seen those pictures 100 times, recognized them like landmarks. Put that away, the squad leader said from the front seat. Game faces. The phone disappeared. The Marines checked weapons, adjusted gear, settled into that pre-mission focus that was part training and part survival instinct, the kind of mental preparation that separated professionals from amateurs. The convoy entered the valley at 0634. In the command center, Sarah watched the live feed from the surveillance drone circling at 12,000 feet. The thermal imaging showed the convoy as a string of bright signatures against the cool morning ground. The valley walls rose on both sides, dark stone, sparse vegetation. Nothing moved except the Marines. Colonel Hartwell stood at the command console, Major Hendricks beside him, Sergeant Major Delaney near the door, everyone watching screens, everyone waiting. Position check, Hartwell said into his headset. All units report. The responses came back in order. Alpha Company in position. Bravo Company rolling. Charlie Company ready. Every element reporting green. Every system functioning. Everything according to plan. Sarah's hands gripped the railing of the observation platform, her knuckles white. McAllister stood beside her, silent, watching. The convoy pushed deeper into the valley. Sarah saw it first. Or perhaps she simply recognized what she had been expecting to see. A thermal bloom on the eastern ridge. Small, brief, gone in less than a second. The kind of signature that could be anything. A piece of metal heated by the sun. An animal. A sensor glitch. There, Sarah said, eastern ridge. Grid reference 4789. Hartwell glanced at the screen. Probably solar reflection off rocks. Valley gets hot. Sir, that bloom was consistent with a machine gun position. Captain Brennan, Hartwell said without looking at her, we have this under control. The convoy continued forward. They were halfway into the valley now, committed. The narrow entrance behind them, the even narrower exit ahead, high ground on both sides, no room to turn around, no space to maneuver. Exactly where Sarah had known they would be when the trap sprang. Another thermal bloom, western ridge this time, then another, eastern ridge again, not solar reflection, not animals, weapons, being uncovered, being positioned, being aimed. Sir, Sarah said. Her voice was steady despite the terror building in her chest. Multiple thermal signatures, consistent with crew-served weapons. They are setting up. All units, Hartwell said into his headset, be advised, possible enemy activity on ridges. Maintain alertness. The convoy rolled forward. Because what else could they do? They were in the valley now, Retreat would mean exposing their rear to fire. Forward was the only option, into the kill zone, into the trap. Sarah's hand found McAllister's arm. She did not realize she was gripping it until she felt his hand cover hers. Steady, the way a father might steady a daughter, or a commander might steady a young pilot about to face her first real test. The first burst of machine gun fire came at 0641. The radio net exploded, voices overlapping, training overridden by panic. The careful protocols of military communications dissolving into the chaos of men suddenly fighting for their lives. Contact! Contact! Taking fire from the eastern ridge. RPG incoming. Bravo 3 is hit. We have casualties. The drone feed showed muzzle flashes stitching across the ridges. Dozens of them. Positions Sarah had predicted with eerie accuracy. Machine guns where she had said they would be. RPG teams in the draws she had marked on her map. A perfectly executed ambush sprung with professional timing. All units, maintain position, Hartwell ordered. His voice was steady. His hands were not. Return fire. Suppress those positions. The Marines tried. They poured rounds into the ridges. 50 caliber machine guns hammered away. But the enemy was dug in, protected by rock, firing from prepared positions. And the Marines were exposed on the valley floor, channeled into the kill zone, exactly where the enemy wanted them. We need close air support, a voice cut through the chaos. Grid reference 4790, enemy machine gun nest, danger close, request immediate strike. Negative, Major Hendricks replied. You are inside the 200-meter danger zone. CAS is not authorized. The radio crackled with a new voice. Calm, professional, cold. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Kincaid, SEAL team leader, call sign Trident Actual, a man who had spent 20 years in special operations and knew exactly what was happening. Command, this is Trident Actual. We are combat ineffective in 60 minutes at current casualty rate. We need air support now. Danger close protocols are going to get us all killed. Trident Actual, those protocols exist for a reason, Hendricks said. The reason is we are all dead anyway, Kincaid replied. So maybe let us die trying instead of waiting. Maintain position, Hartwell ordered. We are working extraction options. Sarah stood frozen, watching 540 Marines die in real time, watching thermal signatures wink out one by one, watching the valley she had studied for 3 months become exactly what she had known it would be, a graveyard. McAllister's hand tightened on hers. She looked at him, saw her father's friend, her mentor, the man who had trained her and prepared her and spent 21 years carrying guilt for one bad decision. His eyes said what his mouth did not. The choice is yours. Sarah looked at the screens, at the dying Marines, at the officers frozen by regulations, at Sergeant Major Delaney who had served with her father and was now watching history repeat itself. Then she looked at her hands, pilot's hands, small, scarred from training, capable of flying an aircraft through conditions that would kill most pilots. Hands that belonged in a cockpit, not in an observation deck watching men die because the people in charge were too afraid to break rules written by people who had never seen this valley. Sarah turned and walked toward the exit. Captain, where are you going? Hartwell called. Sarah stopped at the door, turned back, met his eyes. To do my job, sir. Captain Brennan, I am giving you a direct order. You will not leave this command center. Yes, sir, Sarah said. And then she walked out anyway. McAllister followed. So did Sergeant Major Delaney. The three of them walked across the compound as alarms began to sound behind them. As officers realized what was happening, as the machinery of authority began to grind into motion to stop her. But Sarah was already moving, not running, just walking with purpose. The way her father had walked toward that ambush in Fallujah. The way McAllister had walked toward his aircraft 33 years ago when everyone said the mission was suicide. The way warriors walked when they had already made their choice and all that remained was execution. The flight line was 300 meters away. Her Warthog sat fueled and armed. She had checked it herself before dawn, had gone through every system, had made sure that when the moment came, when everything went to hell, when 540 Marines needed someone to do what regulations said was impossible, she would be ready. McAllister caught up with her at the aircraft. Danny, he said, my grandson, he is in that valley. Sarah stopped, looked at him, at the old warrior who had trained her, who had told her about her father, who had carried guilt for 21 years, who now had his own blood in the kill zone. I know, Sarah said. I saw his name on the roster. Bring him home, McAllister said. Bring them all home. Sarah climbed the ladder, strapped into the ejection seat, the cockpit wrapped around her like a second skin. She had logged more hours in this aircraft than she had sleeping in the last 6 months. Knew every switch, every system, every capability and limitation. This was where she belonged. Not in meetings, not monitoring communications. Here, in the machine built to save Marines. McAllister stood at the base of the ladder, running pre-flight checks from memory, calling out items, hearing Sarah's responses, the ritual they had performed hundreds of times in training, now performing it for real, for the last time. Because if Sarah took off now, her career was over. Court-martial, prison, dishonorable discharge, everything she had worked for gone. She started the engines anyway. The tower was screaming on the radio. Warden 7-2, you are not cleared for takeoff. Shut down immediately. Sarah switched frequencies, found the tactical net, heard the chaos from the valley, heard men dying, heard the desperation in voices that had been confident and cocky this morning. She taxied toward the runway. Security vehicles were racing toward the flight line. Too late. Always too late. Sarah pushed the throttles forward. The Warthog accelerated. Ugly, slow, built like a tank. The most beautiful aircraft in the world to any Marine who had ever heard its cannon. Rotation speed, nose up, wheels leaving concrete, climbing into the morning sky. Behind her, Colonel Hartwell stood in the command center staring at screens, watching an unauthorized aircraft launch, watching his carefully ordered world come apart. His hand hovered over the radio. He could order fighters scrambled, could order Sarah to return, could do 100 things. But Major Hendricks was staring at different screens, at the valley, at the Marines dying, at thermal signatures winking out, at the cost of his 17-year-old fear of making the wrong call. Sir, Hendricks said quietly, maybe we should have listened. Hartwell did not respond, just watched the thermal signature of Warden 7-2 climbing toward Black Ridge Valley, toward 540 Marines who had run out of time, toward a choice between regulations and lives. McAllister stood on the flight line, watching the Warthog disappear into the morning glare. Sergeant Major Delaney stood beside him. She is Tom's daughter, Delaney said. All the way down. McAllister nodded. He was crying, did not care who saw. Tom would be proud. In the cockpit, Sarah leveled off at 5,000 feet, checked her systems, armed her weapons, opened her father's journal to the last page, read his final entry one more time. Some prices are worth paying. She closed the journal, secured it in her flight suit. Then she pushed the stick forward and dove toward the valley where 540 Marines were learning the difference between doctrine and salvation. Warden 7-2 was coming, and hell was coming with her. The Warthog cut through the morning air like a blade through water, ugly and slow and beautiful in the way that only tools built for a single purpose could be beautiful. Sarah felt the aircraft respond to her hands, every input translated into motion, every adjustment precise. This was not like flying a simulator. Not like the careful choreography of training exercises where mistakes meant debrief sessions and embarrassment, but never death. This was real, the kind of real that left no room for doubt or hesitation, the kind of real her father had faced on a dirt road outside Fallujah 21 years ago when he chose to walk toward gunfire instead of away from it. The radio crackled with overlapping transmissions. The tactical frequency was chaos. Men shouting coordinates, calling for medics, screaming for help that was not coming. Sarah forced herself to listen without emotion, to catalog the information, to build a picture of the battlefield from fragments of panic and pain. She checked her heading. Black Ridge Valley lay 15 miles ahead, 7 minutes at her current speed. The Warthog was not fast. Top speed barely 400 knots, slower than every other combat aircraft in the American arsenal. But speed did not matter when you were built to take punishment and keep flying, when your cannon could shred tanks, when your entire purpose was to fly low and close and ugly while everyone else stayed high and safe and clean. Sarah descended to 500 feet above the desert floor, following the terrain, using the ridges and valleys to mask her approach. She had memorized this route 3 months ago, had flown it in her head hundreds of times, knew every landmark, every turn, every place where the ground rose up and the aircraft had to bank hard to avoid turning into a fireball. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, arming the GAU-8 Avenger, the 30mm cannon that made the Warthog what it was. 7 barrels rotating around a central axis, 65 rounds per second when fully spooled. Each round depleted uranium, dense enough to punch through armor, fast enough to turn human beings into mist. Sarah had never fired the cannon in combat, had spent hundreds of hours on ranges putting rounds through target panels and watching the impacts on video playback, had memorized dispersion patterns and ballistic calculations until they were as automatic as breathing. But she had never aimed at living human beings, had never pulled the trigger knowing that other people would die. The thought should have bothered her more than it did, should have triggered some moral crisis, some moment of doubt, but all she felt was cold clarity. Those people on the ridges had chosen to kill Marines, had set their ambush with professional precision, had waited for the perfect moment to spring their trap. They had made their choice. Now Sarah would make hers. The valley appeared ahead. She could see the smoke now, black columns rising from burning vehicles. The thermal imaging on her heads-up display showed the geometry of the ambush. Muzzle flashes stitching along the eastern ridge exactly where she had predicted they would be. RPG teams in the western draws exactly where her map had marked them. A textbook kill zone executed with brutal efficiency by an enemy that understood terrain as well as she did. Sarah keyed her Trident Actual. This is Warden 7-2. I am 2 minutes out. Request target priorities. The response came back immediately. Robert Kincaid's voice. Still calm, still professional. The kind of calm that came from 20 years of walking toward gunfire. Warden 7-2, Eastern Ridge, Eastern Ridge, grid 4789, heavy machine gun nest. That is the anchor point. Everything else feeds off that position. Sarah checked her map. The coordinates matched her analysis exactly. Take out that machine gun and the enemy's entire fire plan would collapse. The interlocking fields of fire would become isolated positions, easier to suppress, easier to escape. Copy, Trident, rolling in on 4789. Warden 7-2, Kincaid said. His voice changed slightly, softer, more human. I do not know who cleared you for this mission, but whoever you are up there, thank you. Sarah did not respond, could not respond, because the answer was nobody cleared her. Nobody authorized this. She was flying into combat against direct orders, throwing away her career, probably heading for prison, all to save men she had never met. Men who had mocked her, dismissed her, told her she did not belong. But that did not matter, because they were Marines and she was a pilot, and the mathematics of duty were simple. They needed help. She could provide it. Everything else was noise. She banked hard left, lining up her approach vector. The eastern ridge filled her canopy, gray stone, sparse vegetation, and somewhere in that landscape a machine gun crew was pouring fire into the valley below, killing Marines, doing their job with the same professional competence she brought to hers. Sarah centered the target in her HUD, checked her airspeed, altitude, wind correction. The cannon would fire for exactly 2 seconds, 130 rounds, enough to obliterate anything in the impact zone. But the dispersion pattern at this range was 40 feet. If she was off by even a small margin, those rounds would fall harmlessly into rock, or worse, into the Marines below. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, not from the journal, from somewhere deeper, from the place where childhood memories lived. His hand on her shoulder, his voice patient and steady. Breathe, baby girl. Let the shot surprise you. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The Warthog shuddered. The cannon roared with a sound like God-tearing fabric, a sustained burst that vibrated through the airframe and into her bones. The spent casings ejected in a stream behind the aircraft, brass glittering in the morning sun like falling stars. Sarah pulled up hard, banking away from the ridge, climbing, getting clear before anyone on the ground could track her movement and bring weapons to bear. Her heart hammered. Adrenaline flooded her system, but her hands remained steady on the stick, her breathing controlled, the training taking over. The discipline her father had instilled, the lessons McAllister had drilled into her skull. The radio exploded. What the hell was that? Did you see that? The gun nest just disappeared. Who is that? Do we have KS? Sarah checked her thermal display. The machine gun position was gone, simply gone. One moment it had been a bright bloom of heat and muzzle flash. The next moment it was nothing. Just cooling stone and scattered debris and the rapidly fading signatures of human beings who had ceased to exist. She felt nothing. No triumph, no horror, just acknowledgement. First target eliminated. On to the second. Trident Actual, Western Ridge, grid 47 to 92, Kincaid transmitted. Another machine gun. Overlapping fire with the position you just destroyed. Copy. Rolling in. In the command center back at base, Colonel William Hartwell stood frozen before the displays. His hands gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. Around him, the operations staff moved with controlled urgency, updating maps, tracking positions, monitoring radio traffic, doing all the things they were trained to do while watching something they had never been trained for. An unauthorized pilot conducting an unauthorized combat mission against direct orders was systematically dismantling an enemy ambush that doctrine said could not be broken. Major Paul Hendricks stood beside Hartwell. His scarred hands rested on the console, those hands that still trembled, sometimes when he thought about Ramadi, about the grid coordinates he had called in wrong, about the 2 Marines who had died because he had rushed, because he had been so certain he was right that he had not double-checked the numbers. 17 years he had spent following every regulation to the letter, triple-checking everything, never deviating from procedure, building a career on the foundation of his mistake, making sure no one else died because Paul Hendricks thought he knew better than the manual. And now he was watching a junior officer with no combat experience do exactly what he had spent 17 years learning not to do, breaking protocol, flying danger close, trusting instinct over doctrine, and saving lives. "Sir," Hendricks said quietly, his voice barely audible over the radio chatter, "we should have listened to her." Hartwell did not respond, could not respond, because Hendricks was right. They should have listened. Sarah Brennan had predicted this ambush with eerie precision, had mapped out the enemy positions, had presented a tactical analysis that now looked like prophecy, and they had dismissed her, told her to stay in her lane, reminded her that real warriors made the decisions while she monitored communications. Hartwell's eyes found the photograph on his desk. His father, Captain James Hartwell, United States Air Force, missing in action over Laos, December 1972, presumed dead, body never recovered. William had been 5 years old, too young to understand death, old enough to know his father was not coming home. His mother had told him later what happened. His father had been on a reconnaissance mission, had spotted enemy positions, had radioed for clearance to investigate. Command had denied clearance. Protocol said reconnaissance aircraft did not deviate from flight plans. Too risky, too unpredictable, too likely to end in disaster. James Hartwell had deviated anyway, had pushed his luck, had gotten shot down by anti-aircraft fire, and a 5-year-old boy had grown up without a father because someone thought they knew better than the people who wrote the procedures. That lesson had shaped William Hartwell's entire career. Follow the rules, trust the system, do not deviate, because deviation meant death, meant folded flags and empty chairs and children growing up asking why. But now, William Hartwell stood in a command center watching the rules fail, watching procedure become paralysis, watching 540 Marines die because he had been too afraid to make the same mistake his father made. Sergeant Major Frank Delaney moved through the command center like a ghost. 30 years in the Corps had taught him to read rooms, to sense the shifts in mood and morale that preceded disaster or triumph. Right now, this room was balanced on a knife edge. Half the staff wanted Sarah Brennan court-martialed. The other half wanted her awarded every medal in the book. Delaney knew which side he fell on. He had been there in Fallujah, had watched Master Sergeant Tom Brennan walk toward an ambush alone, had seen Tom die buying time for 40 Marines to escape, had spent 21 years wondering what kind of man could make that choice. What kind of father could leave his daughter fatherless because duty mattered more than self-preservation? Now Delaney was watching Tom's daughter make the same choice. And the old sergeant major felt something that had been frozen in his chest for 2 decades begin to thaw. McAllister stood at the civilian observation station, his eyes never leaving the displays, watching the thermal signature of Warden 7-2 dance across the valley, watching Sarah execute gun runs with textbook precision, watching her do everything he had taught her. But underneath the professional assessment ran a current of pure terror, because somewhere in that valley, his grandson was fighting for his life. Lance Corporal Danny Castellano, 20 years old, thought he was invincible. thought old men like his grandfather were relics, thought the new Corps had nothing to learn from Vietnam-era veterans. Danny did not know his grandfather had trained the pilot currently saving his life. Did not know McAllister had spent 10 years preparing Sarah Brennan for exactly this moment. Did not know anything except that someone above him was raining down salvation and he needed to not waste it. McAllister's hands shook, not from age, from the weight of watching 3 generations collide. His friend's daughter, his own grandson, the legacy of choices made and unmade across 40 years of service. All of it coming to a point in a valley that should have been avoided. His hand found the coffee cup beside him. Cold now. He drank it anyway. The bitterness grounded him, gave him something to focus on besides the terror of knowing that the 2 people who mattered most were both in that valley and only one of them knew what they were doing. Sarah rolled in on the 2nd machine gun position. Same approach, same calculations, same cold precision. The cannon roared again. 2 seconds, 130 rounds. The Western Ridge position disappeared in a cloud of dust and fire. She climbed away, banking hard, checking her fuel, her ammunition, the status of every system. The Warthog was built to take punishment, but it was not invincible. And she was flying alone. No wingman, no support, just her in the aircraft and 540 Marines who needed her to keep working. The radio chatter was changing. The panic was being replaced by something else. Not quite hope, not yet, but the recognition that someone was fighting for them, that they were not alone, that help had arrived in the form of an ugly aircraft and a pilot nobody had believed in. Trident actual, Sarah transmitted. Primary positions neutralized. What else do you need? Kincaid's response came back fast. Northern draw, grid 4688, RPG team setting up on our evacuation route. We cannot move with them in position. Sarah checked her map. The grid reference was close, very close. Less than 100 meters from the Marine positions. Danger close by, any definition. The kind of shot that should not be attempted. The kind of shot that ended careers or lives, or both. She armed her rockets, the Hydra 70s, unguided but devastating, used primarily against fortified positions and vehicles. Not precision weapons, but sometimes precision was not required. Sometimes you just needed to deliver high explosives to a specific area and trust that the blast radius would do the work. Sarah lined up the shot, checked her angle, calculated wind drift, remembered every training run, every lecture on weapon employment, every hour spent in simulators practicing exactly this scenario. Her finger found the launch button, held there, waiting for the moment when geometry and physics aligned, when all the variables came together, when the shot would be perfect or it would not be, and there was no middle ground. She fired. The rocket streaked away from the aircraft, a white trail of smoke, beautiful and terrible. 2 seconds of flight time, then impact. The explosion bloomed orange and black, rock fragments flew, the shock wave rippled across the draw. The RPG team ceased to exist. Holy shit! Someone breathed over the radio. That was danger close. Warden 7-2, Kincaid transmitted. That was also exactly on target. Thank you. Sarah did not acknowledge, was already scanning for the next threat, the next position, the next problem that needed solving. Because this was not about glory or recognition. This was about mathematics, about reducing enemy positions until the Marines had a quarter to escape, about staying focused until the job was done. On the ground, Lance Corporal Danny Castellano huddled behind a Humvee that had taken 3 RPG hits and was now more liability than cover. His rifle was hot from sustained firing. His hands shook from adrenaline and fear, and the realization that he had been absolutely certain he was going to die in this valley. Then something had changed. The machine gun fire that had pinned his squad for 30 minutes had simply stopped. The RPG team that had been maneuvering to flank them had disappeared in an explosion that made his ears ring. And overhead he could hear the distinctive sound of an A-10 Warthog, that ugly, beautiful bird that every Marine learned to love. Danny did not know who was flying that aircraft, did not care. Whoever it was had just given him a chance to see tomorrow, to call his mother, to finish the letter he had started to his girlfriend, to do all the things you took for granted, until someone was actively trying to kill you. Next to Danny, a young corporal was crying, not from fear, from relief, from the overwhelming emotion of realizing you were not going to die today, that someone had come, that the Corps did not abandon its own. Danny reached over and gripped the corporal's shoulder. Did not say anything, did not need to. They both understood. Both knew what had just happened. Both knew they owed their lives to a pilot who was flying against doctrine and probably against orders to keep them breathing. The squad leader's voice cut through. All units, this is Bravo 2. We have a corridor opening on the northeast vector. Prepare to displace on my command. Wounded first. Stay tight. Danny helped load a lance corporal with a leg wound into the back of a functional Humvee. The wounded Marine's face was gray with shock and pain, but he was alive, would make it to a field hospital, would eventually go home. All because someone above had decided regulations mattered less than lives. Sarah circled the valley at 2,000 feet, high enough to maintain situational awareness, low enough to engage if needed. Her fuel was dropping, not critical yet, but trending that way. The Warthog was not known for long loiter times. It was built to get in, do work, and get out. She watched the thermal displays, saw the Marines beginning to move, saw vehicles repositioning, saw medevac helicopters inbound from the west. The extraction was beginning. The ambush had been broken, not destroyed completely. There were still enemy fighters in the valley, still threats, but the overwhelming superiority they had enjoyed was gone. The Marines had breathing room. Warden 7-2, this is Trident Actual, Kincaid transmitted. We are beginning extraction. Request you maintain overwatch. Copy, Trident. I have you covered. Sarah throttled back, maintaining altitude, watching. Her cannon was still loaded, her rockets still available. If any enemy position tried to interfere with the evacuation, she would eliminate it. Simple as that. Cold and professional and utterly committed to making sure every Marine who could walk or crawl or be carried out of this valley made it. In the command center, Hartwell watched the evacuation begin. Watched his carefully planned operation become a desperate scramble. Watched the metrics that measured success become irrelevant compared to the single metric that actually mattered. How many came home? His hand moved toward the radio, moved away, moved back. He wanted to order Sarah to return to base, wanted to reassert control, wanted to pretend that authority still meant something in the face of what was happening. But Major Hendrick's hand settled on his shoulder. Gentle. The touch of a friend, not a subordinate. Let her work, sir, Hendrick said quietly. Let her finish what we should have let her start. Hartwell looked at him, at the scars on Hendricks's hands, at the weight the Major had carried for 17 years, at the recognition that sometimes the price of being right about procedure was being wrong about everything that mattered. Hartwell nodded, just a small movement, but it meant more than any order he had ever given. It meant accepting that he had failed, that Sarah Brennan had been right, that a junior officer with no combat experience had understood the situation better than a colonel with 35 years of service. The first helicopter touched down. Marines loaded wounded with practiced efficiency. Stretchers passed hand to hand. Medics working fast. Every second counted. Every moment the helicopters were on the ground was a moment they were vulnerable. Sarah watched from above, saw a small group of fighters trying to reposition on the southern ridge, trying to get an angle on the landing zone. She rolled in without thinking, without hesitation. The cannon spoke again. The fighters disappeared. The helicopter lifted off, rotors beating, dust everywhere, banking hard away from the valley, climbing towards safety. Inside were men who would see their families again, who would have a chance to grow old, who would remember this day and know that someone had fought for them when it would have been easier to let them die. Second helicopter inbound, the air controller transmitted. Sarah acknowledged, maintained her orbit. Watch the valley. Watch the extraction. Watch the Marines do what Marines do. Take care of their own. Leave no one behind. Fight like hell to bring everyone home. McAllister stood in the command center with tears running down his face. He did not care who saw, did not care about dignity or composure or any of the things that were supposed to matter. All he cared about was the thermal signature of his grandson moving toward a helicopter, moving toward safety, moving toward the chance to grow up and have children and tell this story to people who would not quite believe it. Sergeant Major Delaney stood beside him. The old Marine's face was impassive, but his eyes were wet. She is Tom all over again, Delaney said, his voice rough with emotion, making the hard call, paying the price, saving people who will never know what it cost. McAllister nodded, could not speak. could only watch and remember and carry the weight of knowing that he had trained her for this, had prepared her, had given her every tool, but had never imagined she would actually have to use them, had hoped the world would be different, that competence would be enough, that she would not have to choose between career and conscience. But the world was not different, and Sarah Brennan was her father's daughter. And when the moment came, she had chosen the same way Tom had chosen, not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was right. The evacuation continued through the afternoon, helicopter after helicopter. Sarah maintained her patrol, burning fuel, conserving ammunition, watching every ridge, every draw, every shadow, waiting for threats that might come, prepared to eliminate them if they did. She was exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, being replaced by the kind of fatigue that came from sustained focus, from flying combat for hours, from knowing that any mistake could cost lives. Her shoulders ached, her eyes burned, her hands cramped on the stick. But she did not land, did not even consider it, not while Marines were still on the ground, not while the job remained unfinished. Warden 7-2, this is Trident Actual, Kincaid transmitted. His voice was different now, tired but relieved. We have all personnel accounted for, 0 left behind. The words hit Sarah like a physical impact. 0 left behind, not some, not most, all of them. 540 Marines went into that valley. 540 Marines were coming out, some wounded, some traumatized, some changed forever, but alive, breathing, given a chance to go home because one pilot had refused to let doctrine become death sentence. Copy, Trident, Sarah said. Her voice cracked slightly, the first break in her professional composure. Glad to hear it, sir. Warden 7-2, Kincaid said. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight. The weight of 20 years in special operations. The weight of knowing what it meant to be saved by someone who had no obligation to save you. I do not know your name. Do not know what made you launch today. But every man in this valley owes you. We will not forget. Sarah did not respond. What could she say? That she had disobeyed direct orders? That her career was over? That she would probably spend years in prison for what she had just done? None of that mattered, not compared to 0 left behind. She turned the Warthog toward home. The aircraft felt different now, lighter somehow despite the weight of empty brass casings and expended ordnance. As if the machine itself understood what had been accomplished. As if the metal and hydraulics and avionics had been waiting for this. For the moment when theory became practice. When all those hours of training proved their worth. The base appeared on the horizon. Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew what waited there. Knew that Colonel Hartwell would have no choice but to begin court-martial proceedings. Knew that Major Hendricks would be required to testify. Knew that the machinery of military justice would grind forward because that was what happened when you disobeyed direct orders. But she also knew 540 Marines were alive, and that knowledge would sustain her through whatever came next. Tower, this is Warden 7-2, Sarah transmitted. Request clearance to land. The response came back immediately. Warden 7-2, you are cleared to land. Runway 27. Welcome home, Captain. The words made Sarah's throat tight. Welcome home. As if she had not just destroyed her career, as if what she had done was acceptable instead of an act of insubordination that could not be overlooked. She lined up her approach. Gear down, flaps extended. The Warthog descended through the afternoon heat. The runway rose up to meet her. Wheels touched concrete. The aircraft settled onto the ground with the grace of a falling brick. Beautiful and ugly, and exactly what it was supposed to be. Sarah taxied toward the flight line. As she turned onto the apron, she saw them. Hundreds of Marines lining the path from the runway to the hangar, standing at attention, forming a corridor, waiting. Her chest constricted. This was not what she expected. Expected arrest. Expected MPs. Expected to be escorted to a holding cell to await processing. Expected the cold machinery of justice to already be in motion. Instead, she found Marines, silent, respectful, standing witness. She shut down the engines. The turbines wound down with a descending whine. The sudden silence was profound after hours of noise. Sarah sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still on the controls, breathing hard, letting the reality of what had just happened settle into her bones. Then she opened the canopy, Desert air rushed in, hot and dry and real. She released her harness, climbed out of the seat, descended the ladder with legs that shook from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. McAllister waited at the bottom. His face was wet, his eyes red. He did not speak, did not need to, just reached out and pulled her into an embrace. The embrace of a father, of a mentor, of a man who had waited 21 years to see his failure redeemed. Sarah held on, let herself be held. Let the weight of what she had done and what it would cost finally register. She had saved 540 lives and destroyed her own future. The mathematics were simple, but they still hurt. McAllister pulled back, held her at arm's length, looked at her the way a parent looks at a child who has just done something magnificent and terrible. Tom would be so proud, he said. His voice was rough with emotion. So damn proud. Before Sarah could respond, another voice cut through, Colonel Hartwell's voice. Not angry, not cold, something else, something harder to define. Captain Brennan. Sarah turned, came to attention, met his eyes. Hartwell stood 5 feet away. Behind him, Major Hendricks. Behind them, Sergeant Major Delaney. Behind them, what seemed like the entire base population. Sir, Sarah said. Her voice was steady. I am ready to face charges. Hartwell studied her. His face was difficult to read. This was a man who had spent 35 years mastering the art of command, of maintaining authority, of never showing weakness or doubt. But right now, something had cracked in that facade. Something human was leaking through. Captain Brennan, Hartwell said slowly, you disobeyed a direct order, launched an unauthorized combat mission, violated multiple regulations, put yourself, your aircraft, and the mission at risk. Yes, sir, Sarah said. No excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement. Hartwell paused. The silence stretched. Everyone watching, everyone waiting. You also saved 540 Marines, Hartwell continued. His voice was quieter now, softer. Executed a nearly flawless combat operation under extreme duress. Demonstrated tactical proficiency that exceeded anything in your training record. And proved that sometimes the right decision is not the legal decision. Sarah did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, just stood at attention and waited for whatever came next. Hartwell looked at Hendricks. The major stepped forward. His scarred hands held a folder. He opened it. Inside were papers, official documents, the kind of paperwork that preceded court-martial proceedings. Major Hendricks spent 17 years following every regulation to the letter, Hartwell said, because he made a mistake once, called in coordinates wrong, 2 Marines died. He has lived with that guilt every day since. Hendricks met Sarah's eyes. His expression was complex. Gratitude mixed with pain, mixed with recognition. I told you the regulations existed for a reason, Captain, Hendricks said. I meant it, but today you showed me that regulations can also kill. That sometimes the greater risk is following procedure when procedure is wrong. He extended the folder toward Hartwell. The colonel took it, looked at it, then closed it without looking inside. These are the court-martial papers, Hartwell said. Everything required to bring charges. Everything by the book. He handed the folder to Sergeant Major Delaney. The old Marine took it without expression. Sergeant Major, Hartwell said, would you please file this in the appropriate location? Delaney's weathered face split into a small smile, the kind of smile that said he understood exactly what Hartwell was really asking. Yes, sir, I know exactly where this belongs. He walked to a nearby trash receptacle, dropped the folder in. The sound of paper hitting metal echoed across the silent flight line. Nobody moved, nobody protested. They all understood what had just happened. A colonel with 35 years of service had just chosen his Marines over his career, had just decided that sometimes the right thing mattered more than regulations. Captain Brennan, Hartwell said, you are confined to quarters pending investigation. That is my official statement. He paused, met her eyes. What passed between them was not forgiveness, not absolution, just understanding. The understanding of 2 warriors who had both learned that command meant making impossible choices. Unofficially, Hartwell said quietly, thank you for doing what I could not do, what I should have done, what I was too afraid to do. Before Sarah could respond, movement rippled through the crowd. The Marines were saluting, one by one, then in waves, hands raised, held, a sea of salutes spreading across the flight line. Sergeant Major Delaney saluted, Major Hendricks saluted, and finally, slowly, Colonel William Hartwell raised his hand in a salute that meant more than any medal ever could. Sarah returned the salute, held it, let the moment stretch, let herself feel it, the recognition, the respect, the acknowledgement that she had earned her place, not through quotas or politics or diversity mandates, but through blood and fire and the willingness to pay any price to bring Marines home. The formation held for 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Time stretched in the afternoon heat. Then Delaney barked an order and the formation broke. Marines flooded forward, not in a rush, but purposefully, wanting to shake her hand, to say thank you, to acknowledge what she had done. Danny Castellano pushed through the crowd. His face was still dirty from the valley, his uniform torn, blood on his sleeves from helping wounded, but alive, breathing, home. He stopped in front of Sarah, looked at her, really looked, seeing her for the first time as something other than what he had expected, what he had been told to expect. "Ma'am," Danny said, his voice cracked, "I said things about you before the mission. I was wrong about everything." Sarah studied him, saw McAllister in the shape of his face, the set of his jaw, the same eyes that had watched her fly for 10 years. "You were not wrong, Lance Corporal," Sarah said. "You just did not know me yet. None of you did. But that is okay, because now you do." Danny nodded, tried to speak again, failed. Just stood there with tears streaming down his face. The tears of a young man who had looked death in the eye and been given a second chance, who understood that the woman in front of him had risked everything to give him that chance. McAllister appeared beside his grandson, put a hand on Danny's shoulder, the old pilot and the young Marine. 3 generations connected by fire and blood and the choices that define them. "Danny," McAllister said gently, "I would like you to meet someone. This is Captain Sarah Brennan. I trained her 10 years ago at a flight school. She is the best pilot I have ever taught." Danny's eyes widened. "Grandpa, you trained her?" McAllister nodded. "And she just saved your life. So maybe it is time you learned what your grandfather has known for a long time. That warriors come in all shapes, all sizes, all backgrounds. And the best ones are the ones you least expect." Danny looked at Sarah again, understanding dawning. Not just understanding that she had saved him, but understanding that his entire worldview had been wrong, that his assumptions had been comfortable lies, that the old man he had thought was stuck in the past had actually been teaching him something he had been too arrogant to learn. "Thank you, ma'am," Danny said. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was profound. "Thank you for my life." Sarah nodded. "Just doing my duty, Lance Corporal." The crowd slowly dispersed. Marines heading to medical, to debriefs, to all the routine requirements of military life, leaving Sarah standing on the flight line with McAllister. The old pilot and his student, the mentor who had carried 21 years of guilt, and the warrior who had finally given him peace. "Your father would have done exactly what you did today," McAllister said. "Same choice, same risk, same willingness to throw everything away for what is right." Sarah looked at the Warthog, at the aircraft that had carried her through hell and brought her home, at the tool that had translated all her training and preparation into salvation. "Did he have any regrets?" Sarah asked. "My father, when he walked into that ambush knowing he would not come back, did he regret it?" McAllister was quiet for a long moment, remembering, feeling the weight of that question. "I asked him that once," McAllister said finally, "before his last mission, asked him if he ever regretted the choices he made, the risks he took, the times he went against orders." "And what did he say?" McAllister smiled, a sad smile, weighted with memory. He said, "Regret is what you feel when you do nothing, when you watch people die because you were too afraid to act." He said he could live with a lot of things, but not with knowing he could have made a difference and chose not to. Sarah absorbed this, felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Her father had not been reckless, had not been a cowboy, had simply understood that some prices were worth paying, that duty sometimes meant sacrifice, that the measure of a warrior was not how carefully they followed rules, but how fully they committed when the rules failed. The sun was setting now. Golden light painted the desert. Long shadows stretched across the flight line. Sarah felt the exhaustion in every muscle, the bone-deep weariness that came after combat, after adrenaline, after making decisions that could not be unmade. But she also felt something else, something harder to define, not pride exactly, not triumph, just the quiet knowledge that when the moment came, when everything was on the line, when 540 lives hung in the balance, She had been ready, and she had not failed. McAllister put his arm around her shoulders, the gesture of a father, of a mentor, of a man who had finally been given the chance to make right what he had done wrong so many years ago. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me buy you some terrible base coffee. You have earned it." They walked together toward the operations building, an old warrior and a young warrior, connected by loss and legacy and the choices that defined them both. Behind them, the warthog sat on the apron, battle-scarred, ugly, beautiful, waiting for the next time it would be needed. Because there would be, yes, a next time. There was always a next time. And when it came, warriors like Sarah Brennan would be ready. Not because they wanted glory or recognition or medals, but because that was what warriors did. They stood between the darkness and the light. They made the hard choices. They paid the prices that others could not imagine. And they came home when they could, knowing that some of their brothers and sisters would not, carrying that weight, living with that knowledge, but never forgetting why they did it. For the Marines who needed them, for the mission that mattered, for the simple truth that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth throwing everything away for. Sarah Brennan understood that now, not from books, not from training, but from the valley where 540 Marines had waited for salvation and one pilot had answered their call. Zero left behind. Those 3 words would stay with her forever, would define everything that came after, would be the measure against which she judged every decision, every choice, every moment when the easy path diverged from the right path. Zero left behind. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, not because it followed the rules, but because it was right. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. The hearing room was smaller than Sarah expected, not the grand tribunal she had imagined during the 2 weeks of waiting. Just a conference room with industrial carpet and fluorescent lights and a long table where 5 officers sat with folders and laptops and the weight of judgment in their expressions. Sarah stood at attention in her dress uniform, the blue jacket pressed sharp, ribbons aligned with precision. Her father's dog tags hidden beneath the fabric but present, always present, a reminder of the choices that had brought her to this moment. The choices that connected her across 21 years to a man she barely remembered, but whose shadow she had spent her entire adult life trying to honor. The Board of Inquiry convened at 0800 on a Tuesday morning. Outside the administrative building, the base continued its normal operations. Marines ran physical training, aircraft launched on scheduled missions. The machinery of military life ground forward with the indifference of institutions that would outlast any individual drama. But inside this room, the future of Captain Sarah Brennan hung in suspension, waiting to be weighed, measured, judged against regulations written by men who had never faced the choice between doctrine and death. The senior officer was Brigadier General Marcus Webb, 59 years old, silver star on his chest, Purple Heart, combat action ribbon, a man who had earned his rank through blood and competence and 37 years of service. His face was weathered in the way that comes from too many deployments and too many decisions, where every option was bad and you had to choose the least terrible path forward. Webb looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen everything, had commanded in Fallujah and Ramadi and Helmand Province, had written letters to families, had made calls that sent young men into situations from which some did not return, had carried the weight of command long enough to understand that authority was not power. It was burden. Captain Sarah Brennan, Webb began. His voice was neutral, professional, the voice of a man executing duty without personal investment. This board has been convened to investigate events occurring on October 14th of this year, specifically your unauthorized launch and conduct of combat operations in violation of direct orders from Colonel William Hartwell. Do you understand the charges? Yes, sir, Sarah said. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her quarters during 2 weeks of confinement, had prepared herself for every possible outcome. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, federal prison, loss of everything she had worked for. She was ready, or as ready as anyone could be. How do you plead? Guilty, sir. I disobeyed a direct order, launched without authorization, conducted combat operations outside the chain of command. All of that is factually accurate. Webb made a note, glanced at the other board members, a female colonel, 2 male lieutenant colonels, a Marine Corps major, all of them with combat ribbons, all of them old enough to remember when warfare was different, when the rules were clearer, or seemed clearer because they were younger and more certain. Captain Brennan, Webb continued, walk us through your decision-making process, from the initial mission briefing to the moment you launched your aircraft. Sarah took a breath, organized her thoughts. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The moment to explain not just what she did, but what. To make them understand the geometry of that morning. The mathematics that reduced to a simple equation. 540 lives against one career. The answer had been obvious to her. She hoped it would be obvious to them. She began with the mission briefing 3 days before the operation. Described how she had studied the terrain of Black Ridge Valley for 3 months. How the contour lines had told a story that contradicted the intelligence assessment. How every tactical principle she had learned predicted an ambush in exactly the configuration that ultimately materialized. I raised my concerns during the briefing, Sarah said. Colonel Hartwell dismissed them, told me to focus on my assigned duties. I understood his position. I am a junior officer. I had no combat experience. My analysis was theoretical. His decision was reasonable given what he knew about me. But you did not accept his decision, Webb observed. No, sir, I accepted that he was not going to listen, but I did not accept that 540 Marines should die because I had not found a way to make him understand. One of the lieutenant colonels leaned forward. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Morrison, Afghanistan veteran, Bronze Star for valor. She had a reputation for being hard, but fair, for judging people based on results rather than politics. Captain Morrison said, you prepared for a combat mission you were not authorized to fly. You maintained your aircraft in combat-ready status. You positioned yourself to launch despite standing orders. That suggests premeditation. Yes, ma'am, Sarah acknowledged. I prepared for the possibility that the mission would go wrong, that the valley would become a trap, that someone would need to break the ambush. I hoped I was wrong, hoped the intelligence was right and my analysis was flawed. But I prepared anyway because that is what pilots do. We prepare for contingencies. Morrison made a note. Her expression gave nothing away. General Webb pulled up a display on his laptop, turned it so Sarah could see. Drone footage from the valley. Thermal imaging showing the ambush. The machine gun positions. The RPG teams. The perfect kill zone that had materialized exactly as Sarah had predicted. Your analysis was accurate, Webb said. Remarkably so. Some might say impossibly accurate for someone with no prior combat experience. How did you know? Sarah thought about her answer, about all the hours studying maps under red light, about the kneeboard notes and calculations, about her father's journal and the lessons McAllister had drilled into her skull, about the accumulated wisdom of generations of warriors who had learned to read terrain the way scholars read books. I learned from people who knew better than me, sir, Sarah said. My instructors at Davis-Monthan, Colonel McAllister who trained me, my father's notes from Iraq. I studied their methods, applied their principles, trusted that men who had survived combat knew more than intelligence analysts who had never left an air-conditioned office. Webb nodded slowly. The answer satisfied him, or at least it was an answer he could understand. Military culture respected lineage, respected the passing of knowledge from experienced warriors to younger ones. Sarah had not claimed to be a genius. She had claimed to be a good student. That was acceptable. The board will hear testimony from relevant witnesses, Webb announced. Colonel McAllister, you are first. The door opened. James McAllister entered in civilian clothes. He had retired from active duty a decade ago, could not be compelled to wear the uniform. But he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had spent 40 years in service, who had commanded squadrons and trained pilots and made decisions that sent people into harm's way. McAllister took the witness chair, met Sarah's eyes for one brief moment. Something passed between them. Not quite encouragement, more like solidarity. The solidarity of people who understood that some choices transcended regulations. Colonel McAllister, Webb began, you trained Captain Brennan 10 years ago, correct? Yes, sir, at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, A-10 Advanced Qualification Course. What was your assessment of her capabilities? McAllister did not hesitate. Best low-altitude attack pilot I trained in 15 years of instruction. Natural feel for the aircraft. Exceptional situational awareness. Scored perfect marks on every gunnery qualification. The kind of pilot you see once in a career if you are lucky. And yet she was assigned to logistics coordination at this posting, Morrison observed. Why was someone with those qualifications not flying combat missions? McAllister's jaw tightened. That is a question for the assignment officers, ma'am, not for me. But if you are asking whether Captain Brennan's skills were being utilized appropriately, the answer is no. She was being wasted. Strong words, Colonel. I am retired, ma'am. I can afford to be honest. A few smiles around the table. Webb made a note. Colonel McAllister, Webb said. His tone shifted slightly. More personal, less formal. We have declassified after action reports from Fallujah 2003. Reports you wrote concerning Master Sergeant Thomas Brennan, Captain Brennan's father. Tell us about that. The room went very quiet. Sarah's breath caught. She had not known they would bring her father into this. Had not realized the board had accessed those old files. Had not prepared herself to hear McAllister speak about Tom in front of judges who would decide her fate. McAllister was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 21 years. Master Sergeant Brennan served under my command in 1st Marine Division, McAllister began. Outstanding Marine, natural leader. The kind of NCO who made everyone around him better. March 2003. We were preparing for a patrol along Route Irish. Tom came to me with concerns. Said the route was compromised. Said he thought we were walking into an ambush. What did you do? I dismissed his concerns, McAllister said flatly. The words came hard but clear. Told him the intelligence said the route was safe, that we were on a tight timeline, that I needed him to focus on his squad and let officers handle strategy. But Sergeant Brennan was right. Yes, sir, he was right and I was wrong. Tom disobeyed my order, took 3 Marines forward to scout, walked into the ambush he predicted, engaged the enemy alone to give the main patrol time to react, saved 40 Marines, died doing it. McAllister paused. His hands gripped the table edge, knuckles white. I wrote the after-action report, McAllister continued, wrote the citation for his Navy Cross, made sure his family got recognition. But I could not bring him back, could not undo my failure to listen to a sergeant who understood ground truth better than his commanding officer. Why are you telling us this, Colonel? Webb asked gently. Because 21 years later, I watched the same thing happen again, McAllister said. Tom's daughter raised the same warning her father raised, about the same kind of terrain, to the same kind of officer who thought regulations mattered more than lives. And I was not going to make the same mistake twice. You encouraged Captain Brennan to disobey orders. I encouraged Captain Brennan to be ready, McAllister corrected, to trust her training, to understand that sometimes the hardest part of duty is knowing when orders are wrong. I told her what her father had done, what it cost him, what it meant, and I let her choose. Did you know she would launch? I hoped she would, McAllister said, because I knew Tom's daughter had his courage, his instincts, his willingness to pay any price to do what was right. And I knew that if anyone could save those Marines, it was her. Webb made more notes. The board members exchanged glances. Sarah kept her eyes forward, kept her expression neutral. But inside something was breaking. McAllister had just admitted to encouraging insubordination, had put himself at risk. For her, for the memory of her father, for a promise he had made 21 years ago to a dying Marine. Colonel Hartwell, Webb called, you are next. The door opened again. William Hartwell entered in full-dress uniform, 57 years old, silver eagles gleaming, the bearing of a career officer who had spent 35 years following the book, building a reputation as steady and reliable, and by the regulations. A man who had never taken unnecessary risks because he had learned early what unnecessary risks cost. Hartwell sat in the witness chair. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago. The weight of Black Ridge Valley had aged him, changed him in ways that went deeper than lines on his face. Colonel Hartwell, Webb began, you gave Captain Brennan a direct order not to launch, correct? Yes, sir. Why? Hartwell took a breath. Because the rules are clear. Danger close air support requires authorization chains that go above my level. Risk assessments that take time. Protocols designed to prevent friendly casualties. I followed those protocols. Even though Marines were dying. Even though Marines were dying, Hartwell confirmed. His voice was steady but hollow, because I believed the protocols existed for a reason. That following procedure would lead to the best outcome. But it did not. No, sir, it did not. Webb leaned forward. Colonel, we have reviewed your service record. 35 years without a single mark of insubordination or regulatory violation. You have built a career on following orders, on being dependable, on doing things by the book. Which all? Hartwell met his eyes. Because my father died when someone broke protocol, sir. The room waited. Hartwell continued. Captain James Hartwell, United States Air Force. Missing in action over Laos, December 1972. He was on a reconnaissance mission. Spotted enemy positions. Requested clearance to investigate. Command denied. He investigated anyway. Got shot down. Body never recovered. I was 5 years old. Hartwell's voice remained controlled. Professional, but something underneath was fraying. I grew up without a father because someone thought they knew better than the people who wrote the procedures, Hartwell said. Because someone broke protocol, made an unauthorized decision, paid for it with his life, and left his family with nothing but a flag and empty words about honor. He paused, looked at Sarah for the first time since entering the room. I spent 35 years making sure I never made the same mistake, Hartwell continued. Never deviated, never broke the rules, because I believed that following protocol kept people alive, that my father died because he did not follow protocol. And I was going to prove that the right way to command was through discipline and regulation and never trusting your gut over the manual. And then Black Ridge happened, Webb said quietly. And then Black Ridge happened, Hartwell echoed. And I watched 540 Marines get slaughtered because I was too afraid to make a decision that went against doctrine. Because I was more worried about my career and my legacy than about the men dying in that valley. Because I had learned the wrong lesson from my father's death. What was the wrong lesson, Colonel? That protocol is always right, Hartwell said. His voice cracked slightly, the first break in his composure. That following orders is the same as doing your duty. That the rules exist to protect us from our own judgment. I was wrong. My father did not die because he broke protocol. He died because the protocol was inadequate for the situation he faced. Just like my protocol was inadequate for Black Ridge. Hartwell looked directly at Sarah now. Captain Brennan saved 540 Marines, Hartwell said. She did it by disobeying my direct order, by trusting her analysis over my authority, by being willing to throw away her career to do what I should have authorized. She was right and I was wrong. And if there is any justice in this hearing, she will walk out of here with recognition for heroism while I walk out facing consequences for cowardice. Colonel Hartwell, you are not on trial here, Webb said. Maybe I should be, Hartwell replied. The weight of his words settled over the room like snow. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. She had expected Hartwell to defend himself, to justify his decisions, to shift blame. Instead, he had taken full responsibility, had admitted failure, had acknowledged that his lifetime of careful rule-following had led to the worst moment of his career. Major Hendricks, Webb called. Please approach. Paul Hendricks entered, 45 years old, his scarred hands visible as he took the seat, those hands that still trembled when he thought no one was watching. That carried the memory of 2 Marines who had died in Ramadi because he had called in coordinates wrong. Major, you opposed danger close air support during the Black Ridge operation, correct? Yes, sir, Hendricks confirmed. I followed the protocols, believed they existed for good reason. Tell us about Ramadi, Webb said. It was not a request. Hendricks closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something old and painful looked out. October 2007, Hendricks began. I was a captain, combat operations officer. We had a squad pinned down by enemy fire. I called in close air support, gave grid coordinates. The strike went in, killed the enemy, also killed 2 of our Marines because my coordinates were wrong, off by 80 meters. A simple mistake, a number transposed, and 2 men died. His hands tightened on the table edge. I have spent 17 years making sure that never happens again, Hendricks continued, following every regulation, triple-checking every number, never rushing, never trusting my gut, because my gut got people killed. But Black Ridge was different, Morrison observed. Black Ridge was different, Hendricks agreed, because this time the regulations were the problem. This time following protocol was getting people killed, and I could not see it, could not accept it, was too trapped by my own fear to recognize that the situation required exactly the kind of decision I had trained myself never to make. What changed your mind? Watching Captain Brennan do what I was too afraid to do, Hendricks said simply. Watching her execute danger-closed missions with precision that exceeded anything in our doctrine. watching her save 540 lives by trusting her training instead of my fear. She proved that the regulations I had been hiding behind were not protecting anyone. They were just protecting me from having to make hard choices. Webb made notes. The board members conferred quietly. Lieutenant Colonel Kincaid, Webb called. Final witness. Robert Kincaid entered in Navy dress uniform, seal trident on his chest, combat decorations that spoke of 20 years in special operations. 41 years old, but carrying himself like someone much younger. The kind of lean hardness that came from a lifetime of staying sharp. Kincaid did not sit, stood at parade rest. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had commanded in every hellhole the War on Terror had created. General Webb, Kincaid began. I commanded the SEAL element attached to the Marine Battalion during Operation Black Ridge. I was on the ground in that valley. I watched my men die while waiting for support that command said was too dangerous to authorize. Tell us about Captain Brennan's actions, Webb said. Kincaid's expression was hard to read. Professional, but underneath was something fierce. Something that looked like loyalty earned through blood. Captain Brennan appeared over that valley when every doctrine said she should not be there, Kincaid said. She executed 6 gun runs and 4 rocket strikes with precision that I have never seen in 20 years of calling in air support. Every target eliminated, 0 friendly casualties. She broke the ambush that command said could not be broken. She created an extraction corridor that saved 540 lives. And she did it while flying alone, without authorization, knowing she was destroying her career. Kincaid paused, let the words settle. I have worked with Air Force, Marine Corps, and Navy aviation for 2 decades, Kincaid continued. I have seen pilots do heroic things, brave things, professional things, but I have never seen anyone do what Captain Brennan did. She flew danger-close missions that would have washed out most pilots. She made decisions in seconds that command could not make in hours, and she did it because she understood something that everyone in the chain of command had forgotten. What was that, Colonel? Webb asked. That Marines on the ground do not care about regulations, Kincaid said flatly. They care about someone showing up when everyone else says it is too dangerous. They care about pilots who are willing to risk everything to bring them home. Captain Brennan did not just save 540 Marines that day. She reminded us all what service actually means. What duty looks like when it is not just words in a manual. Kincaid turned to look at Sarah, held her gaze. Every man who walked out of that valley owes Captain Brennan his life, Kincaid said, including me. If this board punishes her for that, it will be the greatest injustice I have witnessed in my career. And I will make sure every Marine, every SEAL, every warrior in this man's military knows about it. The threat was clear. The board members shifted. Webb's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps? Respect. The understanding that Kincaid had just drawn a line in the sand. Thank you, Colonel, Webb said. You may step down. The board deliberated in private. Sarah waited in the hallway outside. McAllister sat beside her. Neither spoke. What was there to say? The testimony had been heard. The facts were clear. Now came the judgment. Danny Castellano appeared at the end of the hallway. He had cleaned up since the valley, uniform pressed, boots shined, but his eyes still carried the shadow of that day. The memory of thinking he would die, of being saved by someone he had mocked. Ma'am, Danny said, approaching carefully, can I speak with you? Sarah nodded. Danny sat down across from her, struggled with words that did not come easily. I wrote a letter, Danny said finally, to the board. So did 47 other Marines who were in that valley, telling them what happened, what you did, how you saved us. You did not have to do that, Lance Corporal. Yes, ma'am, I did, Danny said. Because before that mission, I said things, thought things about you, about women in combat, about diversity and quotas and all the stupid crap I had been told by people who did not know any better. His voice was thick with emotion. You proved me wrong about everything, Danny continued. Not by talking, not by making speeches, but by being better than me at the thing that mattered most. By flying into hell when no one else would. By being the warrior I only pretended to be. McAllister put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. Danny looked at his grandfather with new eyes. Eyes that finally understood why the old man had spent 10 years training a pilot everyone else dismissed. Grandpa told me about my great-uncle, Danny said. About how he died in Vietnam. About how people like him paved the way for people like you. About how the best warriors are the ones you least expect. I am sorry it took almost dying for me to learn that lesson. The door opened. An aide appeared. Captain Brennan, the board is ready. Sarah stood, smoothed her uniform, walked back into the hearing room with the same steady grace she brought to everything. McAllister and Danny followed, took seats in the observer section, waiting. The board sat assembled, Webb in the center, his expression unreadable. Captain Sarah Brennan, Webb began. This board has reviewed all testimony and evidence regarding your actions on October 14th. We have considered the facts, the regulations, the precedents, the implications of our decision. He paused, the silence stretched. Your actions that day represented multiple violations of military law, Webb continued. Disobeying direct orders, launching unauthorized combat operations, violating established protocols for close air support. Any one of these violations would be grounds for court-martial. Together, they represent the kind of insubordination that cannot be overlooked. Sarah's chest tightened. Here it came. The judgment, the end of everything. However, Webb said, the word hung in the air like a lifeline. This board must also acknowledge the results of your actions. 540 Marines extracted without additional casualties. An enemy ambush broken with precision that exceeded doctrinal standards. A combat operation executed with skill that has been described by experienced officers as exemplary. Webb looked at each board member in turn. They nodded. Captain Brennan, this board finds that your actions were tactically sound, morally justified, and professionally executed, Webb said. We also find that they were illegal under current regulations. Therefore, this board issues the following judgment. He picked up a document, read from it formally. Captain Sarah Brennan is hereby issued an official letter of reprimand to be placed in her permanent record. This letter will note that she violated direct orders and engaged in unauthorized combat operations. It will remain on her record for the duration of her service. Sarah absorbed the words. A reprimand, not a court-martial, not discharge, just a letter, a permanent mark, but not the end. Concurrent with this reprimand, Webb continued. His voice shifted slightly. Warmer, more human. This board recommends Captain Brennan for the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat, for actions above and beyond the call of duty, for valor in the face of extreme danger, for saving 540 American lives through skill, courage, and absolute commitment to the warrior ethos. The words crashed over Sarah like a wave, a reprimand and a medal, punishment and recognition. The contradiction stood, unresolved, acknowledged but not reconciled. This board recognizes that regulations and reality are not always aligned, Webb said. That doctrine written in peacetime does not always account for the chaos of combat, that sometimes the right decision violates the law. We cannot change the law, but we can acknowledge when someone makes the hard choice that the law prohibits, but that honor requires. Webb stood. The rest of the board stood with him. Captain Brennan, your service record will show both the worst and the best of what it means to wear the uniform. Webb concluded. The reprimand will follow you. So will the medal. Let future generations decide which matters more. The board saluted. Not the formal salute of regulation, the real salute, the one that meant respect. Sarah returned it, held it, let the moment stretch. Dismissed, Captain, Webb said. And for what it is worth, thank you. Sarah walked out of the hearing room into the hallway where McAllister and Danny waited. The old pilot and the young Marine. 3 generations connected by choices made in fire. McAllister opened his arms. Sarah stepped into the embrace, let herself be held by the man who had trained her, who had carried her father's memory, who had given her the tools to become what she was meant to be. Tom would be proud, McAllister whispered. So damn proud. Sarah pulled back, looked at him, at the man who had spent 21 years paying for one mistake, who had trained her as penance, who had finally been given a chance at redemption. I want to give you something, Sarah said. She reached into her dress jacket, pulled out her father's journal, the worn leather cover, the pages filled with notes and calculations and wisdom passed across 21 years. This belongs to you now, Sarah said. You carried the guilt long enough. This is your absolution. McAllister took the journal with trembling hands, opened it, saw Tom's handwriting. The final entry. Some prices are worth paying. McAllister closed his journal, held it against his chest. Something that had been frozen in him for 2 decades finally thawed. He cried, did not try to hide it. Just let the tears come. let himself grieve properly for the first time since that day in Fallujah when his friend had died because McAllister had not listened. Thank you, McAllister managed, for finishing what Tom started, for proving I was right to believe in you, for being exactly what your father would have wanted you to be. Danny stood watching, learning, understanding in a way that lectures never could have taught. This was what it meant to be a warrior, not just physical courage, but the courage to carry burdens, to make amends, to pass wisdom forward even when the cost was high. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the base training facility, watching a new crop of pilots go through qualification. Young men and women fresh from flight school, eager, confident, certain they knew what combat would be like. Sarah knew better, knew that no amount of training fully prepared you, knew that the moment when you had to choose between regulations and lives was something you could not simulate, knew that some lessons could only be learned through fire. One pilot stood slightly apart from the others, a young woman, smaller than the rest, quieter, getting the same look Sarah had gotten 10 years ago, the same dismissive glances, the same casual cruelty of people deciding what you could be before you had a chance to prove yourself. Sarah walked over. The young pilot snapped to attention. At ease, Lieutenant, Sarah said. What is your name? Lieutenant Jennifer Garcia, ma'am. She spoke with the careful precision of someone who had learned to be perfect because anything less gave them ammunition. I am Captain Brennan, Sarah said. I run the advanced qualification program. I understand you have some concerns about your placement. Garcia hesitated, then spoke carefully. I was hoping for combat assignment, ma'am, but my orders say logistics support. Sarah nodded, remembered standing in almost exactly this spot 10 years ago, hearing almost exactly the same words, being told to accept her lane, to be grateful for any assignment, to understand that some doors would never open. Lieutenant Garcia, Sarah said, let me tell you something about combat assignments. They are not given to people based on what they look like or what others expect. They are earned by people who prepare when no one is watching, who study when everyone else is sleeping, who are ready when the moment comes even if no one thinks the moment will come. She handed Garcia a folder. Inside were maps, terrain studies, tactical assessments, the kind of work that took months of dedicated preparation. This is what I studied during my logistics posting, Sarah said. Terrain, tactics, weapon employment, everything I needed to be ready for a combat mission I was never supposed to fly. I suggest you do the same, because someday someone will need you, and it will not matter what your assignment says. It will only matter whether you are ready. Garcia took the folder, understanding dawning in her eyes. And Lieutenant, Sarah continued, there is a retired colonel who works aircraft maintenance, Colonel McAllister. Find him. Tell him I sent you. He will teach you things you cannot learn in any manual. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Sarah watched Garcia walk away, saw herself 10 years ago, saw all the young warriors who would face the same doubts and obstacles and casual cruelty, saw the future being built one prepared pilot at a time. McAllister approached from the hangar, older now, moving slower, but still present, still teaching, still passing forward the lessons learned through decades of service and one terrible mistake that had taught him the price of not listening. You are going to make me train another one, McAllister said, but he was smiling. Only the good ones, Sarah replied. Only the ones who remind you of someone. They stood together watching the pilots work. The old warrior and the proven one, the mentor and the student who had become the teacher. I got new orders, Sarah said, Quantico. They want me to help rewrite the close air support doctrine, incorporate lessons learned from Black Ridge. McAllister nodded. Your father's name will be on that doctrine. His after-action report is being used as a teaching case. Sarah felt the weight of that. 21 years after his death, Tom Brennan would finally receive recognition for being right when everyone else was wrong, for trusting his instincts when his commanding officer would not listen, for making the choice that cost him everything and saved 40 Marines. The doctrine will have both our names, Sarah said. Yours too, because you are the one who made sure his wisdom did not die with him. You passed it forward. To me. Now I pass it forward to them. She gestured at the pilots. The next generation, the ones who would face choices their trainers could not fully prepare them for, who would have to decide whether to follow orders or trust their training, who would carry the legacy forward or let it die. McAllister pulled out Tom's journal. He had been reading it, adding his own notes in the margins. Annotations that connected Vietnam to Iraq to Black Ridge. 40 years of lessons learned across 3 generations of warriors. Take it, McAllister said. Take it to Quantico. Let them study it. Let them learn from 3 generations of warriors who understood that doctrine is a starting point, not a prison. Sarah took the journal, opened it to a random page. Her father's handwriting mixed with McAllister's annotations. 2 voices across time, both saying the same thing in different words. Trust your training. Prepare for the moment. Be ready when no one else is. Some prices are worth paying. Simple wisdom. Hard-earned. Pass forward because that was what warriors did. They learned. They taught. They prepared the next generation to face the same impossible choices and hopefully make them better. Colonel Hartwell appeared in the doorway. 3 months had aged him but also freed him. He had submitted his retirement papers. Would leave the service in 6 months. Would spend the rest of his life working with veterans organizations, trying to make amends for the lives he had nearly lost through overcaution. Captain Brennan, Hartwell said, "May I have a word?" They stepped outside into the desert heat, the same sun that had beaten down on Black Ridge Valley, the same sky under which 540 Marines had nearly died. "I wanted you to know," Hartwell began, "the after-action review is complete. The findings recommend changes to danger close protocols. More flexibility for on-scene commanders, more trust in pilot judgment, less rigid adherence to distance metrics that do not account for weapon precision and operator skill." Sarah nodded. "Good. How many lives will that save?" Hartwell looked at her. "We will never know, because the Marines who benefit will never be in the situations we prevent. That is the tragedy of good leadership. Your greatest successes are invisible." He paused, struggled with something. "I am sorry," Hartwell said, "for not listening, for being so afraid of making my father's mistake that I made a different one, for almost costing 540 families what mine lost 50 years ago." Sarah met his eyes. "You learned, sir. That is what matters. You could have defended your decision, blamed me, protected your career. Instead, you acknowledged failure, changed policy. That takes more courage than following orders ever will." Hartwell nodded, offered his hand. Sarah shook it, the grip of 2 warriors who had both learned hard lessons, who would both carry scars, who would both be better officers because of one terrible day in a valley that should have been avoided. As Hartwell walked away, Sarah looked at the mountains in the distance. Somewhere beyond them was Black Ridge Valley, empty now. Returned to the silence it had held for millennia before humans brought their wars to its slopes. The burned vehicles had been recovered, the bodies buried, the physical evidence erased. But the valley would never truly be empty. It would carry the memory of what happened there, of 540 Marines who survived because one pilot refused to let doctrine become their epitaph. Danny Castellano appeared around the corner of the hangar, off-duty, civilian clothes, but still carrying himself like a Marine. That would never change. 20 years old but walking different now, moving like someone who understood that youth was not invincibility. That luck ran out. That warriors survived because others fought for them. "Ma'am," Danny said, "I am heading out. Just wanted to say goodbye." "Where are you going, Lance Corporal?" "Embassy duty. Japan. Figured I could use some time away from the desert." Sarah smiled. "Good choice. Learn the culture. Study the history. Remember that being a Marine means more than fighting. It means understanding why we fight." Danny nodded, then hesitated, something on his mind. "Ma'am, I have been thinking about what happened," Danny said. "About how you saved us. About how I treated you before. About what Grandpa taught you. And I realized something." "What is that?" "Being a warrior is not about how tough you are or how loud you are, or whether you look like what everyone expects," Danny said. "It is about being ready when the moment comes. About doing the hard thing when the easy thing would be safer. About paying prices others are not willing to pay." He met her eyes, really met them, seeing her for what she was instead of what he had expected. "You taught me that," Danny continued. "You and Grandpa and all the warriors who did not fit the mold, but who showed up when it mattered. I want you to know that I will remember. I will pass it forward. I will make sure the next generation knows that warriors come in all forms, and the best ones are often the ones you least expect." Sarah felt something warm in her chest. This was the real victory, not the medal, not the policy changes, but this, one young Marine who had learned, who would teach others, who would carry the legacy forward in his own way. "Semper Fi, Lance Corporal," Sarah said. Semper Fi, ma'am, Danny replied. He saluted. She returned it. Then he walked away, heading toward his own future, carrying lessons learned in fire. The sun was setting now. Golden light painted the desert in shades of amber and rust. Sarah stood alone on the flight line. Her warthog sat nearby, tail number 80-247. The same aircraft McAllister had flown 33 years ago. The same machine that had carried Sarah through Black Ridge Valley. Ugly and slow and absolutely beautiful in its dedication to a single purpose. She walked to the aircraft, ran her hand along the fuselage, felt the patches where maintenance had repaired bullet holes from the valley. Evidence of combat, scars earned through service. The aircraft wore them with the same quiet dignity Sarah wore her reprimand and her medal. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. Hi, John, she opened it. This is Liticall Kincaid. Thought you should know. The SEAL community just approved a new training evolution. Close air support coordination with emphasis on danger, close procedures. They are calling it the Brennan Protocol. Figure you earned the naming rights. Sarah stared at the message. Read it 3 times. Let the meaning settle. Her name on a training protocol. Her methods being taught to the next generation of special operations warriors. Legacy in a form she had never imagined. She typed a response. Honored, sir. Make sure they understand it is not about breaking rules. It is about knowing when the rules do not apply. Kincaid's reply came fast. They will understand, because I will make sure every class hears the story of the pilot who flew into hell alone to save 540 Marines. The one who proved that courage is not following orders. Courage is making the right call when the orders are wrong. Sarah pocketed her phone, looked up at the sky. Stars were beginning to appear. The same stars that had watched her father walk toward an ambush in Fallujah. The same stars that had watched her dive into Black Ridge Valley. The same stars that would watch future warriors face their own impossible choices. She thought about her father, wondered if he would be proud, wondered if he had known when he wrote that final journal entry that his daughter would one day face the same choice he faced. The same terrible mathematics of duty and sacrifice and the prices that could not be avoided. Some prices are worth paying. Sarah understood now what he had meant. Not that sacrifice was good, not that dying was noble, but that some things mattered more than self-preservation. That warriors accepted prices that others could not imagine because someone had to. Because Marines counted on it. Because the alternative was unthinkable. McAllister approached one final time. He moved slowly in the gathering dark, 70 years of life showing in his gait. But his eyes were clear. The weight he had carried for 21 years was gone, lifted by watching Tom's daughter complete what Tom had started. I am leaving tomorrow, McAllister said. Retiring for real this time. Going back to Arizona. Bought a small place near Prescott. Figure I will spend my remaining years teaching kids to shoot. Passing forward what your father taught me. Sarah nodded. That sounds perfect. McAllister handed her something. A coin, worn smooth. Military challenge coin from the Vietnam era. A-10 squadron insignia on one side, McAllister's call sign on the other. Gunner. Your father carried this on his last patrol, McAllister said. I took it from his effects. Been carrying it ever since, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. He pressed it into Sarah's hand. Now is the right moment, because you have proven you understand what it means, what it is, what it requires. Sarah held the coin, felt the weight of it, the history, the legacy passing through 3 generations, Vietnam to Iraq to Black Ridge, McAllister to Tom to Sarah. Warriors teaching warriors, preparing the next generation for choices that could not be explained, only experienced. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice thick, for everything, for training me, for believing in me, for making sure I was ready when the moment came. McAllister smiled. It was a good smile, free of guilt for the first time in decades. You were always ready, Captain. You just needed someone to see it, to believe it, to give you the tools. He saluted one final time. Sarah returned it. They held the salute longer than regulation required, because this was goodbye. Not forever, but goodbye to this chapter, this phase of their lives where mentor and student had worked together toward an uncertain goal. Now the goal was achieved. The student had become the teacher. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. Warriors preparing warriors, passing forward wisdom earned through blood and sacrifice and the willingness to pay prices that others would never understand. McAllister walked away into the darkening evening. Sarah watched him go, watched the old warrior disappear into his well-earned rest, carrying Tom's journal, carrying memories of 2 generations, carrying the peace that came from knowing he had kept his promise. Sarah looked down at the challenge coin in her hand, rubbed her thumb across the worn surface, thought about the 2 men who had carried this coin before her, about their choices, their sacrifices, their legacies. Then she looked at the stars again, at the infinite darkness punctuated by points of light, each star a sun, each sun potentially harboring worlds and life, and warriors facing their own impossible choices across the vast silence of space. She thought about all the warriors who had come before, all who would come after, all who stood in the gap between chaos and order, who paid prices others would never know, who made choices that doctrine could not account for, who survived or did not, but who always showed up when the moment required it. Sarah Brennan was one of them now, not because she was special, not because she was different, but because she had been tested, had faced the choice, had paid the price, had earned her place in the long line of warriors who understood that duty was not a word. It was a weight, a burden, a privilege. The stars looked down impassively. They had seen it all before, would see it all again. Warriors rose and fell, empires came and went, but the fundamental truth remained constant across millennia. Some prices were worth paying. Some choices transcended regulations. Some warriors were ready when the moment came, and the rest was just details. Sarah pocketed the coin, turned away from the stars, walked back toward the lights of the base, toward the future she had earned, toward the next generation she would train, toward all the moments yet to come when someone would need her to be ready. She was ready. She would always be ready, because that was what warriors did. They prepared, they served, they sacrificed. And when the moment came, they answered. Every time, without fail, until the very end.